All right, we interrupt all the nonstop rumors and reports, the mock drafts, the pro days. Let's talk Cardinals draft 2023 needs and wants as we look into our crystal football and forecast the Cardinals' future, right? We start with offense. Let's talk quarterback. And Darren, you start with the disclaimer.
The disclaimer, of course, Paul, being that Kyler Murray is absolutely going to be rehabbing all offseason, probably through training camp, maybe into the regular season, probably into the regular season. So anything that happens at quarterback has obviously got that kind of specter over it of when does Kyler come back, which we don't know right now.
Okay, so do the Cardinals go for a quarterback in this draft? Maybe on day 3, show of hands, what are we thinking? I agree. I'm thinking if you can find a dual threat quarterback who allows you to play the same style of offense as a Kyler Murray, I don't know, UCLA's Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who was a 5-year starter, had nearly 50 career starts. Sounds a lot like a Brock Purdy, who had all that experience in college. So we'll see. We'll see if the Cardinals go quarterback at some point. What about running back? Craig Grialou, we know James Conner is RB1. After that, a lot to be decided.
Not a huge priority, obviously, given the other needs of this team, but I do think this might give us a little bit of a window into what this offense could look like. Just based off the front office where they've been, coaching staff where they've been, Tennessee, Derrick Henry, Philadelphia, Miles Sanders, Cleveland, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, all 4 day 2 picks. Again, not a huge priority for me, but if it is called on day 2, then I do think we know what this offense might look like.
And we know the Eagles' philosophy was, hey, we throw it to score, we run it to win. Physical football, right?
Well, you have your bulldozing running back in James Conner. The problem is staying healthy. He missed 4 games last season, and I think you need to find a complementary back. I would like to see someone a little smaller, shifty, fast, to really complement and have that 1-2 punch, because you have that heavy running back in James Conner, and you're going to need to efficiently and effectively run the ball, especially not having Kyler Murray to start the season.
I don't disagree with that. I think when it comes to the draft, I'm curious to know if anybody else gets added late. Last year they added Darrell Williams deep into the offseason. Obviously he wasn't a shifty back, but I'm of the philosophy, and I don't know where Monty Ossenfort falls with this, I'm of the philosophy that you don't spend a high pick on a draft on a running back. And I will also say that with the way this roster is set up, with the defensive needs it has, with some of the offensive line needs it has, if I'm taking a running back, it's definitely later on. We talked about the quarterback and when you might take it. I'm not so sure I would take a running back before a quarterback. So I think there's some choices that have to be made, and I think with some of the guys on the roster right now, especially Corey Clement, who's done a little bit, and seeing what Keontae Ingram can do, I think that also impacts things.
Darren, take receiver for us right now. We know it's not a deep draft in terms of receiver. We know the Cardinals, it's a little fluid, but they have names, they have numbers, they have depth. How do you assess this position group?
Well, at this point, obviously the number one thing is what happens with DeAndre Hopkins. The potential of a trade is there, but the potential of him being here is there. And I think that changes a whole lot of things, whether he is on this roster or he's not on this roster. If you look at what the Cardinals have right now, Hollywood Brown, Rondale Moore, Greg Dortch, smaller receivers. They did sign Zach Pascal, who is a bigger guy, and I think they're going to need that. And if you look in the draft, if you look at what potentially is there when it comes to bigger receivers, Jordan Addison of USC, Jackson Smith and Jigba from OSU, who was injured all last year, but a lot of people think he could be really, really good, or Quentin Johnson out of TCU. Now, are those guys there in the second round? Because I don't think you're taking that guy with the number 3 pick, but that is a position that absolutely, if DeAndre Hopkins is not here, needs to be looked at, I think.
If you do not have D-Hop on this roster, you do not have a number 1 wide receiver on this roster as we speak. Now, historically, in the last several years, this team has drafted a boatload of wide receivers, a lot of draft capital at the wide receiver position. It's not a big need. If you look at offensive line and defensive line, it all hinges on what happens with number 10.
I understand Hollywood Brown might not be at the caliber of DeAndre Hopkins, but I would almost argue that he could still be your number 1 receiver. He was hurt. He had a career-low 3 touchdowns last season. However, the offense had a boatload of struggle, so it wasn't just on the wide receivers. I think if you do get a wide receiver, one of size, especially after losing AJ Green, possibly DeAndre Hopkins, Antoine Wesley. Zach Pascal is your only size right now, really, in your wide receivers room. So I would like to see more size. And I think if you can find a wide receiver who can really supplement what Brown does with that speed and that deep ball, I think he can step up as a #1 receiver.
Again, not a deep draft for wide receivers. It's very deep in tight ends. Typically, there's like 4 tight ends over the first 100 picks. This year, there could be 8. That's the forecast. So we'll see. Now, we know the Cardinals have Zach Ertz, Trey McBride, most prominently. We don't know exactly the timetable for Zach Ertz returning from injury. We also know Jonathan Gannon has said he likes to live in 12 and 13 personnel. You're going to need tight ends. So we'll see where the Cardinals go. And because it's so deep, I can't see them on day 2 going for a Sam Laporta out of Iowa, who was sort of underutilized, tight end U, but they had the most boring offense in college football, right? You go for maybe a Josh Wiley out of Cincinnati with 15 touchdown catches, 6'6", 250. I could see that possibly a tight end coming the Cardinals' way midway through this draft. Now, offensive line, Danny. We know they're building from the inside out. I do expect this to be a point of emphasis in this draft. How about you?
Well, there still is a lot of building to be done from the inside if that's the way they're approaching things, Paul. There's a lot of questions when it comes to your offensive line as a whole because you don't currently have a full starting offensive line. Your left tackle, DJ Humphries, your right tackle, Kelvin Beachum, likely your right guard, Will Hernandez, and at left guard and center, it's a lot of question marks. There is still a possibility that I think the Cardinals could look at moving Josh Jones, who's been your swing tackle, to maybe being a left guard. Jones has said he does feel more comfortable on the left side. He has experience there a little bit in college. However, there's question marks at your left guard and center, really, because there's only one offensive lineman on this Cardinals roster who has played an NFL snap at center. Even though head coach Jonathan Gannon recently said that he feels comfortable with the options the Cardinals have at center, I'm not so sure that this is what your starting lineup is going to look like on the offensive line. This is a very high draft need because you have to give these players time to develop. I would like to see maybe a veteran center brought in, players that have versatility and can really bring stability, because I don't think you have that in the interior right now.
You can be comfortable in March and April what your offensive line looks like. Much different story when you're getting into August and September. So I agree with Danny. You do not have a starting center on this roster. It's the interior of the offensive line, to me, that is a big, huge question mark. And then just when you talk about the draft, it's also not just this season, but seasons to come. DJ Humphries is the only one that you can count on after this season. So what do you do when you're talking about protecting your most valuable asset? And that's Kyler Murray in the quarterback position.
I would say the thing you have going with Will Hernandez is the fact that he's played both sides. Last year he was the right guard for the Cardinals, but he played left guard his entire career in New York before he came to Arizona. So he could be your left guard. That's possible. They liked what they saw out of Marquise Hayes before he got hurt at the end of the preseason. There are questions, but as you said, and even Jonathan Gannon said it at the owners' meetings, which was, I have an offensive line that I can take on the field right now. I have an offensive line that I can take on the field for minicamp right now. I don't think he believes that this is his offensive line potential going into the season. You've got the draft. Monty Ossenfort absolutely is going to approach both sides of the lines in the draft, in my opinion. And so you're going to have a considerably different pool to look at when we get to training camp, and more specifically when we get to the end of the preseason.
I don't think anybody would be surprised if top of round 2 they take an offensive lineman, especially a center, future center you compare with Kyler for the next 10 years, something like that. 8 picks for the Cardinals right now going into this draft. Might be more after a few draft day trades. We'll see. That's the offensive side of the ball for Draft Primers 2023.